Hi, I'm Sarah Stricker from the Guelph Turfgrass Institute, and I have Samantha Knight with me today. Samantha, would you like to explain what your career is right now?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Sam Knight. I'm at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and we are Canada's largest not-for-profit land conservation organization. And I manage research projects across the country for our National Conservation Science Program. And I used to work at the University of Guelph, where I also did my master's. I did my master's on tree swallows, but I got the opportunity to work for a couple of years as a monarch butterfly researcher in Ryan Norris's lab at the University of Guelph. So got to learn a lot about monarchs in that time and happy to share the knowledge I've gained in that time.
That's amazing. And that's why I have you here because I'm really interested in monarchs. What's so special about monarchs? I mean, I think a lot of people, if you were to ask them to name a butterfly, they would be able to say monarch butterfly. So what is so special about a monarch butterfly?
Well, they're one of the few butterflies that everyone can identify. I mean, some people get them mixed up with the viceroy butterfly, which is a mimic, which is kind of cool, but everyone can identify them. And when people see them, they're big, they're bright, they're beautiful. You just kind of feel happy and cheery. But not only seeing them in Ontario, but also knowing that they make these incredible migrations all the way down to Mexico each year. So they migrate thousands of kilometers over just a couple of months is super incredible.
I think that's just crazy. I mean, I have all this like leg muscle, arm muscle, and I have a hard time even walking to the grocery store, and a butterfly, just so fragile, flies all the way to Mexico. That's really cool. Okay. And so why is milkweed specifically really important for monarch butterflies?
Yeah, so milkweed is the plant that monarchs have to lay their eggs on. So there are several species of milkweed. There's a few different species in Ontario, including common milkweed, swamp milkweed, and butterfly weed. But that's the only plant that monarchs will lay their eggs on. And that's the plant that their larvae, once they hatch from eggs, will feed on and grow on. So larvae grow 2,000 times their size from when they hatch as an egg, which is crazy. And it's all on those milkweed leaves. So they need to be around so monarchs can breed. By late May, you need to have milkweed available, and they're going to be breeding intensely between June and August for the most part. And there's several generations. So a monarch butterfly will start off in Ontario. So a monarch butterfly that's born in Ontario at the end of the summer is going to migrate all the way down to Mexico. That individual in Mexico is going to overwinter and migrate back north to about Texas. So come just part of the way, it's going to lay eggs, die, and then the next generation is going to migrate a little further north into the Midwest of the States, have eggs, die, and the migration continues. So it's actually the third or fourth generation from Mexico that makes it up to Ontario. And then depending on how nice the summer is, how long it takes them to get up north, depending on the weather, there's two or three generations that can occur in Ontario. So you might have a first generation in June, they'll lay their eggs, die, a second one in July, and then a third one in August, for example. So the feeding can occur anytime in those few months.
Right. So it's just important to have milkweed available all summer for the
Hmm.
monarchs.
Yeah.
And so you said there's a bunch of different species of milkweed. How would I know I was looking at a milkweed plant?
The easiest way to identify common milkweed is if you tear the leaf a little bit, it has the substance that comes out that looks milky. It's kind of white. I haven't actually tried to do that on swamp milkweed or butterfly weed, so I couldn't tell you if it comes out as milky as the common milkweed, but that one is very evident.
So you wrote a paper that was published in 2019 in Global Ecology and Conservation. It was titled Strategic Mowing of Roadside Milkweeds Increases Monarch Butterfly Oviposition. Can we
Hmm.
can we break that down? What does that mean? What is strategic mowing?
Yeah, sure. So strategic mowing is knowing when to mow, how frequently to mow, and how intensely to mow, I would say. So when I say intensely, are you mowing every milkweed in the area? Are you mowing at a specific height? So there's lots of different parts that can come with that.
Okay, and so you're looking at milkweed growing on the roadside, so in the
Hmm.
ditches and sort of grassy areas there, and that it increases monarch oviposition. So that means egg laying?
Yeah, exactly. It's the number of eggs they lay is exactly what we counted.
Let's start back. How did you start this project? Like, how did you decide, okay, it's going to be roadsides and this is how we're going to be mowing?
For sure. So I was lucky to jump in on this project midway through the second year of data collection. So I was in the brains behind it. Dr. Tyler Flockhart, who did a PhD and postdoc at the University of Guelph, was the one who worked with Dr. Ryan Norris to come up with the concept. But basically, roadsides represent a huge area of land across North America. And you can imagine that these roadsides connect cities, so they may also connect habitats. And roadsides are heavily managed. You have to manage them for safety, for example. So, when a car's driving by, they're not, all this shrubs growing over. And so, if they're already managed, and milkweed likes being managed, it's one of the first plants to grow after you mow the lawn, for example. Oh, maybe not the lawn per se, but places where it's got this slightly more successional habitat, we say. So first grasses come, then you get some flowers, and then it's one of the first bigger herbaceous plants that'll come in. So anyway, roadsides have this huge opportunity, and already I don't know the exact number, but perhaps 25 to 40% of roadsides around North America already have these milkweeds in them, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. And of
Yeah.
course, they're spread across North America. They provide these connections. So it's this huge opportunity to provide habitat and milkweed for monarchs. So that's why we chose to tackle roadsides. But you could also imagine that railways, under hydro lines, along pathways through urban areas all have the same kind of habitat that this could also apply to.
So I didn't make that connection of that because it's disturbed by us, nothing else is growing in there. So that's why the milkweed comes.
Exactly. So I'll just add that if you don't disturb it, things like shrubs will come in, and then in a few years, trees will come in. So we talk about needing this perfect early successional habitat that maintains the milkweed, or otherwise it's going to disappear. And this milkweed used to be in agricultural habitats before herbicides got rid of them, but it was the same kind of idea. They're constantly being managed, so it's maintained that
So
habitat.
monarch butterflies they're not endangered yet, but they're like on the cusp of being endangered. Are milkweeds also endangered?
Yeah, so monarch butterflies are listed as a species at risk, I believe, still for the Species at Risk Act, SARA in Canada, and then CSIWIC, which is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada.
That makes
And
sense.
they've listed them as endangered. So they are, somewhere in between special concern and endangered, depending what jurisdiction you're in. Milkweed is not listed. It's considered a weed, so it's very pervasive. It used to be in Ontario listed as a noxious weed. People didn't like having it around. So you can imagine if it's listed as a noxious weed, it's probably because it is able to persist. But as herbicides and mowing practices, intensify, there is the risk that it could be lost. And it's estimated that 1 billion stems have been lost in the past several decades, but there is still quite a lot of it around.
Is milkweed something that I could buy seed for and plant?
Absolutely. And some garden centers will even grow it, and you can buy a milkweed plug, as you call it, and put it in your garden already grown. But it's very easy to spread milkweed seeds. It pops up fairly easily. So, you can technically go up to any milkweed plant. If it's producing these pods full of seeds, you could just take those seeds and plant them in the fall. They need to have stratification, it's called. So they need to have a cold, wet winter and some abrasion in the ground before they will end up flowering or blooming the next year.
Like the tulips, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the absolute end finding of your paper that you did?
Yeah, so the reason we undertook this is we wanted to know if we could improve the quality of milkweed for monarch butterflies. So it's been shown that young milkweed shoots are preferred by monarch butterflies. Perhaps they're more nutrient dense. We don't really know why they're preferred, but you can imagine like a fresh leaf looks a lot nicer to a monarch butterfly than an old leaf that's been sitting around in the sun for months. So we found that more eggs were laid on young fresh leaves than on the old milkweed leaves. And to be able to get these young fresh leaves mid-season, mowing can accomplish that. So we really wanted to set out and see when was the best time of year to mow beyond just finding that they do prefer ovipositing or laying eggs. So we also looked at the optimal egg laying dates. And what we found is that at least in these couple of years, and there is variation depending on the weather of the year when the butterflies come back from migration, but in these couple of years, the end of July, beginning of August is when monarchs were just pumping out eggs. They were really laying a lot of eggs at that time. And so because they like the young shoots, if you mow milkweed about 2 weeks before that peak, then you're going to be having all these fresh young leaves for them to lay on. But there's so many considerations that goes into that. I mean, it's worth going out and observing if you are mowing for monarch butterflies that there aren't a bunch of caterpillars or eggs already on the milkweed. It's so touch and go, I think, between years because of the weather that it is very challenging to find that window. But if you can find that window between generations, like I mentioned, there's multiple generations and this peaks at the beginning of August. You can imagine they're between generations between that peak, and there would have been a peak at the end of June, early July. So
Right.
we recommend in between those two peaks for mowing. So it's a bit of a challenge to find that optimum, but around the end of July is generally what's good. In Guelph anyway, it depends where you are.
Right. Yeah. Because this is at a specific latitude, 43-degree north.
Mhm.
It could change further up and down, right?
You tend to be able to go a little bit later the further south is what previous studies have found. So there's been studies in, I think it was Virginia and one in New York, and they both were able to mow early in August rather than late July to have that full benefit. And so
Right.
our study was in Sarnia, which is just 1 or less than 1 degree perhaps difference between here and Guelph. So we can imagine in Guelph you might want to do it slightly earlier by only a couple days. But if you're in Northern Ontario, it's going to be, earlier in July.
Very cool. Awesome. And I know you did your thesis on birds. So what
Mhm.
is your current career now? Like, what did you do after finishing your master's at Guelph, and where are you now?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a conservation biologist in some way or another. So I did some work on birds. I did this work on monarchs. I've studied bees before. I really just am interested in any kind of question that can contribute to on the ground conservation outcomes. So as mentioned before, now I'm at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, managing the National Research Program. And really the goal of our program is to take research questions that have some sort of conservation impact and management impact. So we buy land and manage it in perpetuity for biodiversity conservation. So I take questions such as, how do we improve habitat for birds, for example? How do we have one project right now looking at prescribed fire and butterflies. So any kind of research question that can have an on the ground impact on how we manage our land is what interests me.
And if you had one recommendation to say to a golf course manager or a parks or landscape manager specifically about monarchs, how can we help the monarchs? What would you tell them?
Yeah, as much as you can, leave the milkweed undisturbed. If you do have to mow between May and September, try to fit it in at the end of July if you are in Southern Ontario. And ideally, leave some milkweed behind so that the monarchs that do come by in that time still have some milkweed to lay their eggs on. But if possible, just leave it be, and the monarchs will really appreciate it. In addition to bees, birds using the habitat, everything out there will benefit from that habitat.
Oh, for sure. I think everyone who's in the turf grass industry, we are landscape stewards at the heart of it. I think there's a big push in environmentalism. And if you look at a map like of a big city, like look at Mississauga, the only green spaces left are golf courses. So
Mm-hmm.
we try to keep those as nice as we can. And I think a lot of turf managers are really interested in birds and butterflies. And I get pictures all the time. Oh, look, the turtles came up to lay, and we like made a little spot for them to nest. So I think everyone's going to be really interested in this study. If we wanted to find you on Twitter, do you have a website? Where can
Yeah,
we follow you?
I am on Twitter. My handle is SMKNIGH. So it's my last name without the T. I'm also on LinkedIn, if you search Samantha Knight, and you can easily find me at the natureconservancy.ca. If you type in my name, it links to the conservation research I'm working on.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. And I hope to hear more about your work in nature conservation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate getting to talk, and I'm so happy that there's all this marginal habitat around these managed areas that is good for wildlife. It's so great to see those green spaces.